Hello, everybody. Welcome to Get Mental Podcast. Thank you guys for tuning in. We have a very exciting show today, and I can't wait for us to get into the topic. How are you doing, T?
I'm feeling amazing. What's up, Get Mental family? Welcome back. Welcome back. I'm excited. Such an amazing show today, guys. We have a special guest today, and we're ready to share them with you guys today. Let's rock and roll. Good morning.
Good morning. So, our guest today, without further ado, is Dr. Brent Lacey. He's a gastroenterologist, a Navy veteran who is passionate about helping physicians succeed with business and personal finances. As a physician, he understands how overwhelming it can be to step out of clinical training and into a career, and he has seen firsthand the lack of education on how to run a practice and manage finances. And boy, can I relate to that on a personal level, because therapists don't get that training either. He has coached hundreds of families to succeed in eliminating debt, and he has spoken to physician groups around the country on topics related to business and personal finance. He also founded the Scope of Practice website and podcast, and his ultimate goal is to help physicians learn how to manage their businesses successfully and master their personal finances. Welcome, Dr. Lacey. Thank you so much for being here today.
Hey, thanks. That's maybe the most enthusiastic introduction maybe I've ever had. So thank you so much.
Well, you don't know what you're in for because you are with two Energizer bunnies.
Oh, let's rock and roll. Nothing outlasts, right?
Yeah. So the topic for today, sorry guys, I forgot to mention that, is on financial infidelity. And this was actually suggested by Dr. Lacey himself, which I think is really fascinating because you are not a mental health professional, and yet you have a lot of specialized knowledge, if I may say that, on this issue. Why don't we just start there? What got you interested in this arena and in this particular subject?
Well, I mean, if you mean money in general, this is something that I've kind of been into ever since I was a kid. I mean, I was blessed to have, parents that really stress the importance of good financial education. So when I got to college, just seeing how many of my friends didn't have basic concepts like, don't spend more money than you actually have, and how to save some money, and how to how to make more money and that sort of thing. And so I kind of took that as like, well, not everybody gets that kind of training. And so then you go through college and med school and everything's kind of the great equalizer, but people coming out of med school and residency were no better, is what I was finding. It's been amazing. And so, the main reason that I started the Scope of Practice was because when I observed that all these physicians are coming out of training and they're great at being doctors, right? And they're just lousy at everything that has to do with running a small business or managing their own personal finances. And so that's my goal, is to try to help people, get some of those tools, that knowledge, those resources to get to where they can manage their business more successfully and master their personal finances.
Wow. And so what kinds of feedback or demand have you gotten since you started this?
Well, I think it's kind of like being a doctor. You'll always have a job, right? Because people are just always going to be sick, and I think it's probably generally true that people are always just going to be lousy with money. I mean,
that's sad.
And most of the people that I work with now are physicians and healthcare professionals, just because that's what I do most of. But I got started on all this stuff actually through my church. I started a financial discipleship ministry at my church, and so the thing that's been interesting, I think, over the last, 5 or 6 years is seeing, people in the, in the lower socioeconomic status versus folks that are making, 6 figures. The only thing that I think that's different about the stuff that we as physicians do bad with money is we do the same kinds of dumb stuff, just with more zeros on the end of it.
You're just wasting more money.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's nothing fancy or nothing sophisticated about what any of us do or don't do. I mean, it's either you make smart choices or you don't. And the truth is, everybody makes the same 5 or 6 lousy choices. I mean, it's, not planning for the future, not knowing where your money's going, spending more than you're actually bringing in, failing to save for, big purchases, buying stuff on credit, living with debt. I mean, those are things that we do on various levels.
So
And,
true.
so maybe a physician's going to have a couple of, ridiculous car leases on a Beamer and a Tesla, but someone else, maybe they're going to payday loans, or maybe they're, doing, they're buying a house they can't afford. I mean, we all do the same kinds of silly stuff with money, and some, it's just, different flavors of the same thing.
Yeah, so true.
Absolutely. I love that.
The other,
Yes.
were you going to say something, T? Sorry.
Yes, Dr. Lay. So I have a question. And, me and Cecile, we actually brought this question up in relationships, right? Where I like to say, like, if there's no finance, there's no romance, right? So, Dr. Lacey, my question is, in your experience, what really put couples at risk, like financial infidelity? Like, what will put a couple at risk of bad, poor money management?
Yeah, so I think it's a threefold problem. One is lack of knowledge, the second is lack of funds, and the third is lack of communication. And it's just like, if you think of it like a three-legged stool, right? If I come along and I saw one of those legs off and the other two legs are still standing, the stool's going to topple over, right? And so you got to have all three things or it doesn't work. And so let's take those one at a time. So first is lack of knowledge. And this is fortunately a problem that everybody can solve, and ultimately this is where it kind of comes down to individual decision making and couple interdynamics. So if you don't know how to do a budget, there are, just Google how to budget and you're going to find 65 million hits, right? There are software programs and apps and, good old fashioned notebook paper. It's really not that hard to learn how to do this stuff. The information is out there. And so that's the one good thing about it, is that if you don't know what to do, I mean, just walk up to Barnes and Noble and drop $15 on a book about money and you can figure this stuff out. But it comes down to individual decision making and just deciding that this is going to be important enough that I'm going to pay attention and make it a priority for our family. So that's thing number one, is lack of knowledge. The second is lack of funds. Or lack of money. And really what I mean by this is not that you're not making enough money, is that you are overspending your income level. And so,
Living beyond your means.
Exactly. Living beyond your means. And so, when I was a college student, I got a job as a file clerk, 20 hours a week so that I could, make some extra money to make ends meet. And not all my friends did that, but if you look at the stuff, and people freak out about that, they're like, well, but what about my college experience? Well, first of all, you're not there to have an experience. You're there to get a degree and find some useful information to actually, go out and do
that is
something
the
valuable
experience
to society. Right. But studies have shown that people who work, 10 to 20 hours a week graduate with higher GPAs than people who don't, because it forces you to learn good time management skills. I mean, that's statistically proven.
Wow, that's fascinating. Thank you for that info.
Yeah, it's 100% true. And I did the same thing when I was in med school. I mean, I was a teaching assistant for a couple of years in med school, and I did tutoring on the side to make some extra money. And I just decided that I wasn't going to spend money I didn't have. So if I got to the end of the month, it's 5 days till the end of the month, and I'm down to enough money to buy food. If I got an invitation from a friend to go out to eat or something, I'd be like, sorry, I'll hit you up next Tuesday or something. But as for the rest of the month, I can't help you.
But Dr. Lacey, how much did modeling play into that? Was that like something that was modeled to you by like your parents or family?
Oh, I thought you were asking about have I been modeling? I know it looks like I've been a model, right? So no, I think that was a huge thing for me, actually. So, and more is caught than taught. So, kids learn their behaviors from their parents, not from what they say so much as what they do. And so, my parents, I was very blessed that I had parents that were smart with money and that made it a priority to teach us to be smart with money. And thank goodness I listened, because it was invaluable. So I think that's been huge. So I learned how to be frugal. I learned how to budget. I learned how to, make strategic decisions to set yourself up for success long-term. And that was definitely modeled by my parents. And so the third thing is, beyond lack of funds, is lack of communication. And this is the one that really, I think, is probably the biggest one, is the lack of communication. And some of the problems that I find is that either people are, sometimes it comes from modeling where, maybe one of the members of the relationship doesn't have didn't have a background where they talked about money, or maybe worse, maybe money was a taboo subject. And anytime money would come up, people would say, "Oh, we don't talk about that in polite
Mm-hmm.
society. That's not something we
Mm-hmm.
discuss, with other people." And so it was considered this sort of taboo subject.
Mm-hmm.
And then, some people are afraid or ashamed of what their spouse might think of them if they suggest, well, I want to do this with our money, I want to do that with our money.
Mm-hmm.
And some of that comes down to the lack of knowledge, and a lot of it comes down to just fear or guilt or shame. And if you don't talk about money, it's going to be a problem. Money fights and money problems are the number one cause of divorce in North America.
Yes.
It is not
Yes.
close. And
Yep.
so, this is what I always tell my students and my residents. If you're going to get married, you better agree on some key foundational principles. And if you and your spouse don't agree about money,
Yep.
you will fail.
Yep.
Statistically speaking, that is true. And
Mm-hmm.
the reason for that is that
Absolutely.
when you agree about money, you have to therefore agree about everything that money is used for. And so
Yep.
you agree on what you're going to, where you're going to send your kids to school, where you're going to live, who's going to work and who's not, what are you going to save for, how fast are you going to pay down debt. All that stuff has to be agreed on if you agree about subjects related to money.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I cannot stress that enough. Well said. And I see that a lot, as a therapist, when people have money issues and issues around parenting values, money and children, those are the top two problems that people really have a hard time navigating. And it can be a make or break situation for many couples. So.
Yeah, and I can't tell you how many times I've been sitting down and just coaching a couple, and they're coming to me because they're in dire financial straits and trying to figure out how to climb out of this hole of debt that they've dug themselves into, and then had them come back to me months later and say, you know what, that conversation about budgeting saved our marriage. I'm like, well, hang on a second, I'm not a couples counselor, so what the heck are you talking about? And they'll say, no, you don't. It's like, you don't understand. Like, we had to sit down and hash out all these issues to figure out what we're going to put in our budget. And it forced us to have tough conversations about things that we had been avoiding. And now we just talk about everything, and it's great.
Right.
Awesome.
Right. Yeah. Because our personal relationship with money, affects how you move in your romantic relationship. So there's a strong correlation there. But before we get ahead of ourselves, can you please define what financial infidelity is?
Sure. Yeah. So financial infidelity is a state where your spouse or the person in your relationship has violated your trust in a matter of finance. And so that's a very broad way of saying any way that you feel like your expectations were one thing with related to money and your spouse went and did something else. And so that can be something very, very simple, like, they bought something that was not in the budget and just didn't tell you about it. It can be something very small, or it can be something really big, like they have a gambling addiction and they go and do online poker in the
behind your back,
behind your back, and run up a big gambling debt, or they go open up a bunch of credit cards in your name and just go shopping like crazy and then they'll tell you about it. So it can run a pretty wide gamut.
So me sneaking in a shoe purchase without my husband's knowledge or approval makes me guilty of financial infidelity.
Well,
I think we're all guilty then to some extent.
Well, so it depends on how you define behind your back. So, for example, like one of the things that I often will recommend to couples is have a line item in your budget where each person has a designated amount of money every month that they can spend whatever they want on. Yeah. And it's just, it's Cecile's fun money, it's T's fun money, or whatever.
Love that.
And then you don't have to tell them what you're doing with it or why, and you don't have to justify what you're buying and why. And that is really, really freeing, because if you agree on everything else in the budget, and then you have some freedom to say, okay, well, I have this, whatever, $30 a month or 50 or 100 or whatever. Then if one person wants to save up for 6 months and go buy some new, I don't know, remote control car or something like that, or if the other person wants to blow it all, every month, just buying lunch for themselves every day, or going to get, coffee with friends or whatever, you can do that. And it actually kind of has the opposite effect of creating fights. It actually creates opportunities for fun conversations, because then instead of saying, oh yeah, I bought this sweater. What do you mean you bought this sweater? And so, instead of having that conversation, it's, hey, I bought this sweater with my fund money. The person on the other end is like, okay, well, I know you spent that money and we had already agreed that was okay. And then I'm not worried about it. And then I can say, oh my gosh, that is super cute on you. How in the world did you find that? That's great. Where'd you get it? Oh, we should get more stuff like that for you, right? It's a much, much better conversation.
Yeah, it changes the energy, and
100%.
the attitude, because you've agreed to it. There's personal accountability, there's collaboration. So I can definitely see why that would work. I'm gonna take some of those tips from you, Doc, and bake it into some of my sessions.
So, Dr. Lace, I have a question as well. As I sit here and listen to the amazing value that you have, my question is, how does financial infidelity, how does it affect different cultures, right? Ethnic groups, right? We see that statistically, a lot of races are doing better than other races financially. Is that a culture problem, or is it just a mankind problem?
I think it's really more of a mankind problem. It's a very interesting question. And I think you're going to find some differences in culture where so to take, for example, if you have one cultural, norm that is that one member of the family, say the man, is, responsible for everything and sort of is a patriarchal system, and the woman in the relationship doesn't have any say, and that's the norm, then it may not be construed as financial infidelity by one or more of the partners, just because it's just in keeping with,
Culture.
with the standard, with the culture. But I would say that in general, in most, in the counseling sessions and the coaching sessions that I have done, it has been fairly race neutral. And I think the reason for that is that whether it's big or small, financial infidelity feels like a betrayal. And in many, many cases, I think it is comparable to finding out that your spouse had an affair. And there's gradations of that, of course. So, if someone goes out and buys, let's say something small, like a new pair of shoes or something like that, that might be the equivalent of, someone who's kind of leering at another person, sexually or something, but not actually acting on it, right? Versus, you have someone who set up an apartment for a mistress or something, might be the equivalent of someone who goes and racks up a huge amount of gambling debt. Either way, it is a huge breach of trust, because you have placed your trust in this person that said, okay, we're partners in this. Okay, we're sharing our finances, we're sharing our lives together, but you went off and did this thing that is completely counter to all the stuff that we had previously talked about and agreed upon, and you didn't tell me about it. So there's mistrust, there's betrayal, and it feels in many ways like someone's having an affair. And that's why we term it financial infidelity, because it really does take on that big of a role in someone's life, and it's incredibly destructive to the trust that your spouse has placed in you, and it can be really detrimental to the victim's mental health.
Right. And I support that, completely, because that's what I see in my office, in my practice. What about for you, T? Because I know you do a lot of financial coaching. What's your take on that, as far as what Dr. Lacy said?
Yes, I love the science behind what Dr. Lacy is saying. A lot of times I speak from the spiritual, and that's some questions I'm going to ask in today's episode as well, Dr. Lacy. But I appreciate the mindset behind why people do what they do, and the causes. So I got those 3 notes: lack of knowledge, a lack of funds, and a lack of communication. And I believe as well that plays a major role in my field, because knowledge, with action really takes your life to the next level. So not just getting the knowledge, but actually applying it, guys. So if you're listening in, you can take an amass amount of notes, but if you don't apply it, nothing changes if nothing changes. And then the lack of funds, as well, because Dr. Lacy, I teach people how to, start businesses and invest in other things. So having a lack of funds definitely plays a role in this topic that we're speaking about. And then the communication. If we can't talk about it, we can't converse about it, then there's no way to map out a path to success. So it's kind of like a one-man show. So it takes two to tango. So these three keys that you laid down today, it's really about to change my life. So I just thank you for that, Dr. Lacey. And I'm all ears this morning. And man, we just have some great questions this afternoon to really get your input on, really what's causing the financial infidelity. So thank you so much, Dr. Lacey.
Yeah, well, I think you really hit the nail on the head. I mean, knowledge without action can't take you to the next level. You're 100% right. I mean, that's tweetable right there. So, so if you're listening, if you're listening to that, T Smith or whatever, but yeah, that's 100% true. I mean, you can know this stuff and not apply it. I mean, if you have a library full of 1,000 books and you've read them all and done nothing about it, you haven't really accomplished very much.
And if you're stuck, if you don't know how to act, that's probably, what are some of the barriers to action in your experience, Dr. Lacey, when it comes to this subject?
Well, I think lack of knowledge is a big one. Is, people just don't know where to start. I mean, because when you start saying, I need to fix my financial life, that's like saying I need to build a castle, right?
Yeah.
Where do you start with something like that? It's
right.
a huge project. So I think that's a big one. I think guilt and shame are the other really big one that I see, is that very often when folks are coming to me, I mean, it's they say it's like, it's not healthy people who need a doctor, it's sick people, right? So the people who need a financial coach most commonly are folks that have gotten themselves into a hole, and a lot of times there's a lot of guilt and shame that's associated with that. They've made poor choices. They're not as far along on their retirement savings as they want to be. They're not able to pay for their kids' college, and they feel ashamed about that. And so, getting past the emotional piece of it is a really big part of it, I think. And then just, giving them the knowledge and equipment and then encouragement to do it, I think is really where I come in.
So Dr. Lacey, my next question is, in your personal experience, how has mentorship played in your life regarding finances? Is there individuals that you look up to, that you strive to be like, or some people that you really take an immense amount of advice from regarding finances?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, my parents are definitely the biggest mentors in my life with regard to finances, just because, I grew up with this stuff and I started learning it from an early age. But I would say that in general, yes. Other people I would call mentors, behaviors that I've tried to emulate. And what I've needed from mentors has changed over the years, right? So when you're first starting out with this stuff, you need someone who can just kind of help teach you the basics, right? So it's how to budget, how to spend money wisely, how to save money wisely, how to give money wisely. And then as you get farther along, it's, how do I take advantage of tax savings? And, how do I save for a big purchase like a home? And what's a Roth IRA versus a traditional IRA? And how do I know which one to invest in? You start getting gradually more and more sophisticated over time, and your mentorship needs, change. And so you find different people at different places, but 100%. I mean, that's one of the things that I think a lot of times will separate people who succeed from those who don't, is people who know what their limitations are, know when to go seek help, and then find those people to go seek help from.
Absolutely. I'm barely speechless, by the way, but this is really, I'm speechless for a good reason, because you're speaking our language, and you're also really hitting a lot of the key points, in that you have to know your limits, and you have to be teachable. You have to have the humility to say, I need support, and I need to get the knowledge that I need to take myself to the next level, right? And you guys, if you're listening, you don't have to do this alone. If you're feeling overwhelmed, if you can relate to what Dr. Brent is describing, just start small. Just, start somewhere. Ask your friend who you believe is making good money choices, for a resource, or just ask them how they did it. And most people will tell you, will share stuff with you. Isn't that true?
Yeah, I think that's 100% true. And, that question, how did you do it? That question underscores what I think is a really important model for self-growth and for success, is to ask other people who are winning at something that you want to be successful at. How did you do it? So, when I want to learn, how do I be a better father? What does it take to be a better husband? I want to go find someone who's been married for 45 years and go, all right, you obviously know something about this. what's your secret? How can I
Yes.
have a 45-year-long marriage? You know, if I've got a guy who's got 3 kids that are well put together, I'll be like, okay, tell me, let me get my notepad out and just you start talking. All right. What did it take? What were some of the things that you learned? Who did you learn from? What did you read? What did what was your process? And the more people you ask about that, and like you said, people are happy to talk to you. I mean, you think about the number of people that you have in your phone. I mean, how many of them could you reasonably call up and just go, hey, listen, I'm starting on this new business venture and I want to learn how to be better at it. Can you help me? And that how many of them wouldn't take you to coffee and be like, yeah, let me help you out. You betcha. You know
Yeah.
why? And you know why? Because people did that for them.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean,
Yes.
and that's that if they like you and they're, friends with you, they want to help you. And
Yes.
there's people out there that want to help for sure.
Yes, use your network, Dr. Lacey, you talked about this thing being race neutral. I'm wondering, have you noticed if it's also class neutral, high socioeconomic status versus low socioeconomic status? Because we have a theory that really the problem is financial education and financial literacy, not so much a lack of opportunities, especially living in a country like the United States. We have plenty of opportunities. That's the position T and I, espouse. And it's the problem really is about financial education or a lack of financial education.
Yeah, so it's a great question, and that is both the good and the bad of this. Is that it is largely class neutral, race neutral, gender neutral, sexual orientation neutral. I mean, like I said before. I mean, I've coached hundreds of couples. I mean, people like 75-year-old ladies who are widows and living on Social Security. They are literally living on $1,335 a month, right? In states like California. And all the way up to docs that are making, who are dual income households making $400,000 a year. And everybody makes the same 5 or 6 dumb mistakes with money. I mean, it's
Across the
amazing.
board.
It has
Wow.
been amazing to me to see that it is not limited to one class, one race, one gender. It is absolutely pervasive. And the lack of knowledge is a big thing. And like I said, ultimately, fortunately and unfortunately, it comes down to individual decision making. I mean, the information's out there, the opportunities are out there, and it at some point it's going to require an act of will. Now, someone who, like me, fortunately, who is blessed to have parents who taught me this stuff when I was a kid, I feel a very strong burden to then take that and try to teach it to as many people as I possibly can who didn't have those opportunities, right? And so, but at some point, it's going to just take an act of will of someone who is in a bad situation saying, okay, look, this is bad. I need to fix it. Let me see if I can figure out how to fix it. And the good news is that there are, opportunities out there, but it comes down to not, and one of the things that I think is a mistake that people make is thinking that it's related to an absolute dollar figure, and it's not. You need to think of it more in terms of proportions or percentages. So if you're making, so the median income in America is $52,000 per family per year. That's median
Is it really?
household.
Wow.
That is median household income in America is $52,000 a year, not average, mind you. So it's not skewing with Warren Buffett and Bill Gates. That's median. And that's been stable for a very long time.
What's average? I'm just curious.
Average isn't too far off. It's a little higher because you get a skewed average from billionaires that factor in there. But if you just go with median, it's about $52,000 a year.
Wow.
But when if you've got someone who's freshly out of college, or someone who is working a minimum wage job or something, and they're basically making $20,000 a year, okay, they have to make exactly the same decisions that somebody making $400,000 a year is making. And those decisions are. I need to spend less money than I'm making, and I need to save money for the future. I need to continue to work so that I continue to bring in money, and I need to find ways to be generous with my money. Those are the big decisions that everybody has to make, and those decisions they look different when you're making $20,000 a year. Believe me, because I had a lot of years where I was making $20,000 a year or less. So, I mean,
I remember those days too.
A lot. Okay. So, so believe me, I understand that. But unfortunately, it doesn't change the, the situation. I mean, I like to say nobody gets a pass on math. I mean, if you make $20,000 a year, that makes my heart break for you. And
Yeah.
my goal is to help people get, get on better footing, make some decisions that lead to long-term career success, so that 5 years from now they're making $50,000 a year, and 10 years from now they're making $100,000 a year from now, right? I want to
Yeah.
help them
It's
make those
possible.
decisions to get there. 100%.
Yep.
But the decisions are the same. And so if you're making $20,000 a year, your choices are going to be somewhat more limited than someone who's making $100,000 a year. But the questions you
But
have to
the
ask yourself and the
questions, yeah.
decisions you have to make are exactly the same.
Yeah. Great
Absolutely.
point.
So I have a question, Dr. Lacey. I was sitting back getting that value. Like, my notebook is getting filled up today, right? So, Dr. Lacey, my question next is the process, right? What are some things that you recommend people do daily? Because you don't choose your future, you choose your habits, and your habits choose your future. Right?
Amen. Drop the mic.
What are some habits? How do we cultivate better money habits on a daily basis? What do people do, and the choices they need to make on a daily basis to really get in that financial freedom space?
Mm-hmm.
I think the number one thing that you got to make on a daily basis is to spend less money, is to say no. Remember you remember Dare back in the 1990s?
That's hard.
Like just say no, right? I mean, it is hard, but here's the thing: the value that, or the people who succeed over time are not the ones that have the most successful like investing strategies and the greatest tax advantage, this and that, and who can go through the most government loopholes and that sort of thing. It's the people who are disciplined and consistently spent less than they made and save for the future. So my grandparents, okay, so yeah, my grandmother was a school teacher, like an elementary ed teacher, for 40 years. And my grandfather worked for the Postal Service, and they retired as multimillionaires, right?
Wow.
As an elementary ed teacher. And here's something, okay, I'm gonna blow your minds here for a second, okay? So there was a study done about 3 years ago called the National Study of Millionaires. And in the National Study of Millionaires, what they did is they did a survey of over 10,000 American millionaires and asked them like 100 questions about, what are your habits? What did you do? Like, what was your success story? Okay. Here's something very interesting. Okay. Top 5 jobs occupied by America's millionaires. Okay. Take a guess. What do you think would be in the top 5?
Engineers.
Okay, engineers were number 1. All right, that makes sense, right? Because engineers.
My husband's an engineer. That's why I know, because they're very organized with these things.
They're very organized. They're very analytical. Okay, number 2 is accountant, and that makes sense, right? So they're good with money. They're smart with financial figures. Okay, doctors did not make the top 5.
I'm not surprised.
Lawyers did not make the top 5. You want to know what number 3 was?
Teachers.
Number 3 was school teachers.
Wow.
Number 3 is school teachers. The third most common job occupied by an American millionaire is school teachers. Some of the most underpaid, undervalued people in our workforce. And they are the ones that are getting to millionaire status better than doctors are, who are making a lot more money. So it can't only be a matter of making more money. And so, T, to your original question, it's about saying to yourself, okay, you know what? I'm going to get coffee from the break room at work instead of going to Starbucks every day. And that's going to save me $5 times, 25 days a month times, 12 months a year times 30 years. Well, that adds up. It's going to be, I'm not going to lease a car because I know that's the most expensive way to own a vehicle. Okay. I'm going to pay cash for cars, and I'm going to drive beat up junk for a while till I can afford something better. I'm going to choose to live in a house that is smaller than the bank wants to loan me money for, because I know that if I overextend myself, I can't save for the future. I'm going to, teach my kids to be smart about money so that they will grow up and not live in my basement. Right. So it's making all those smart decisions every single day. And the biggest thing ultimately comes down to, I need to spend less stuff. I need to not buy stuff I can't afford. And the simplest way to do that, I've found, is to do an experiment for 3 months. Just resolve that you're not going to buy anything on a credit card for 3 months. Okay. Just every week, go to the ATM at your bank, take out however much cash you need for the week, and only buy stuff with cash. You feel differently about purchases when you have to spend with cash versus when you spend on a credit card. It will change your spending habits.
I just wrote that down just before you said that. I'm so glad you brought that up. And that's actually a strategy that a lot of 12-step groups. So for example, there's a 12-step group if you have a problem with overspending called Debtors Anonymous. And that's one of the things that they will suggest is that make a connection with money. Because when you are using credit cards and paying stuff online, there's a disconnection that's happening there. You're not really feeling kind of the pain and you're not getting the same awareness when you're spending the cash that you've committed to, spending for that month. And as you're seeing every dollar, every coin go out of your hands, there's a different process that happens to us internally. It creates
100%.
kind of a more realistic process for us. Whereas buying by credit card, I mean, we've all been there, I think, where you just swipe, and the next thing you know, you're like, how the heck did I have that kind of bill this month? So thank you for bringing that up. And the other thing too is, conscious spending. I love what Dr. Lacey is saying, like, pause for a second. Before you guys purchase something, just pause and ask yourself, what is my intention? And T and I talked about this in another show. What is my intention for buying this particular thing, right? Because a lot of times there's a mental health and emotional component to what we're reaching for, to our spending habits. A lot of times we're using things to, fill emotional gaps and voids in our lives.
One of the easiest ways to avoid unnecessary spending is just to say, okay, I just say sleep on it. Okay. Just don't buy it, sleep on it. And if you wake up the next morning and you're like, man, I'm still gung ho for that thing, then okay, then you know that it actually something matters to you. But if you go home, you take a cold shower, you go to sleep, and you wake up in the morning, you're like, yeah, I'm glad I didn't buy that. That would have been dumb.
Or I'm over it,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dr. Lacey, so I got a great question for you. Can we speak to the millennials real quick, right? Let's speak to the 18-year-old, 19-year-old kid that's about to head off to college, start his life, and loves to live on his cell phone, has a credit card, debit card, doesn't have any responsibilities. What do you say to someone who's 18 years old, who has the world at their fingertips? How do they start their financial journey, Dr. Lacey?
So I would say that the first thing that they need to do is put themselves on a written budget every month. Okay. So figure out how much money that you have to spend in a given month and allocate that money at the beginning of the month. So you decide at the beginning of the month, okay, I'm going to spend this amount on, food, this amount on rent, this amount on entertainment, this amount on my books, this amount on travel, whatever. And you're not going to deviate from that. And, in the first 90 days, as you go through your first 3 months of budgeting, you get more and more accurate at it. So your first month, you may have several things that your categories you underestimated or overestimated, and you get better at it. But put yourself on a written budget every single month and just decide that you're going to stick to it. That's the first thing. The second thing is do not get a credit card. Do not get a credit card. Okay. So it is absolute mythology that you are required to have a credit card to build your credit. Okay. It is absolute mythology. Okay. The FICO score, if you look at the FICO score, it is 100% made up of factors that surround you having debt and paying interest on it. That is how the FICO score is calculated. And you can look this up. It's on, if you just go to FICO, just Google FICO score and you can see exactly what it is. Now, no one knows exactly how they do the algorithm, but you can see what their percentages are. This is widely public, but it's, what new debt have you taken out? What's your level of debt? How much interest are you paying on the debt? It's all your interaction with debt. And so the only way you can have an 800, credit score is to take out a lot of money, like borrow a lot of money and pay interest on it for a long time. And that is not a recipe for financial success. And, here's the thing. People think, oh, well, you have to do stuff. You have to have a credit card to do stuff. No, you don't. That's mythology too. I mean, everything that you want to do with a credit card nowadays can be done with a debit card. 100% of the stuff. You can rent cars. You can buy stuff online. You can take money out of the bank. The only thing that a debit card can't do is allow you to go into debt, because once you hit zero in your bank account, you're done. Right. So don't get a credit card. I can't tell you the number of people that I have seen that come out of their first semester of college with $5,000, $6,000, $10,000, $20,000 in debt. And it's with what you were saying earlier, it's little daily decisions. It's, well, I'm going to go order this pizza. I'm going to go out to dinner with friends. I'm going to go on this road trip with my buddies. I'm going to get tickets to this concert. Oh, you know what? Let's get the VIP package for the concert. You don't pay attention to these things, and they add up a little bit at a time. You know, it's like when you see someone who weighs 400 pounds, you're like, man, how do they allow themselves to get to that? And the answer is a little bit at a time. It didn't happen overnight. It's corrosive. It's slowly corrosive. It's like cancer. It eats into you. So put yourself on a written budget. Don't get a credit card. If you do those two things, you are so far ahead of everybody else.
Yeah, that's such a great point. So what then, just going back to the credit and credit score, how are you going to build your credit score if you don't have credit?
I would encourage people to not worry about building their credit score, to be perfectly honest. Okay. Because the credit score, what do you use the credit score for? You use the credit score so you can borrow money on stuff.
Right.
But if you've established that borrowing money is generally a dumb idea, then you don't need a credit score. I mean, so the one thing that you might need a credit score for is buying
a house. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So there's a couple of ways you could do it. One is that, you know, if you have credit cards and other stuff, and you are diligent about paying off the balance every month, you can build credit that way. I will tell you though, that 18 and 19-year-olds should not trust themselves with that yet. If they go for a couple of years paying for everything in cash and develop really good spending habits, and they want to go for it, eventually fine, but not when you're a freshman or a sophomore in college. I think it's a really bad idea. The other thing is, if you never have a credit score, you can do something called manual underwriting. And it's a little harder to do because not everybody does it anymore, but it's what people used to do before there were FICO scores. Is you just, you know, if you have a credit score that is essentially zero or it's uncalculable, you find a mortgage company that'll allow you to do manual underwriting, and they'll just look and see, okay, they'll look at your last couple of income statements. They'll look at, you know, you can send them a budget, you can send them what your current rent is, and they can run some calculations and go, yeah, this is something you can afford, or no, it's not. It's what everybody used to do before there were FICO scores. And so not everybody still does that, but there's enough places that do. And in my mind, the value that you get out of going massively into debt on car loans and student loans and credit card loans and personal loans and payday loans and whatever other kinds of loans is absolutely not worth it, because the fastest way to get out of debt, to build wealth, is to get out of debt. Yeah, is to get out of debt and stay out of debt. That is the fastest, most assured way to build wealth over time.
You know, that's a great point. Like, this whole credit thing is largely an American practice, because I came, I lived in Australia and I'm still a citizen as well of the country. And I remember when I first came here, everyone was talking to me about my credit. I'm like, I don't have credit. Like, why is that not a good thing? And I could not get a car because I didn't have a credit history. So, and I didn't have, I was in my early 20s. I didn't have a whole lot of money to like pay off a car. So I ended up like putting it down, and then I ended up like just getting a loan, and my interest rate was out of control because it was my very first loan in my entire life, and I remember just telling my family members, I'm like, this is so backwards. Like, why is not having credit a bad thing? It should be rewarded.
It is one of the most marketed products in absolute all of human history. I mean, the credit card companies and the banks are the most marketing savvy people out there. I mean, you think about it. I mean,
they're making money off of you.
Right. I mean, just go through, just watch a 1-hour sitcom or drama on primetime and just count the number of commercials there are for banks and credit cards and, loans from car dealerships with financing available, or furniture with financing available. It's half. It's ridiculous. And so I agree with you that, like a credit score of 0 should be something that we celebrate. And so whenever someone says, I've got a credit score of 750, I'm like, man, that's really unfortunate. You probably paid a lot of money in interest to get that. You'd be way better off to just pay everything off, let your credit score go down to 0, freeze your credit. And then, people are like, well, what am I going to do if I don't have credit? And I'll say, you'll have money.
I love that. A lot of your advice is counterculture, though. I mean,
100%. And here's the thing.
100%.
Here's the thing. I am proudly countercultural when it comes to this kind of stuff, because here's the thing. Like you just said, okay, normal in America is credit cards, student loans, car leases that you can't afford. That's normal. Normal is broke. Normal is normal is you can't write
Normal is broke. That's treatable.
right. Normal is, you don't have more than $10,000 saved for retirement. That's normal. Even at the age of 55, that is average. Okay. Normal is I can't write a check to pay off $1,000 emergency if I needed to replace a carburetor on my car or something like that. That's normal. Normal is wretched. I am not a fan of normal. And so
Love it.
if you want normal, man, go get yourself a couple of car loans, get a big house that you can't afford.
Live beyond your means.
And then find you a cookbook that shows you, how to make stuff out of, baking soda and grass. And, good luck to you on that. That's fine. You want to do that. But I tell you what, normal's miserable. People come to me because they are normal and they hate it.
Yes. Oh my God. That is amazing. You just gave me goosebumps there. Normal is wretched. Normal is wretched. I'm going to tweet that.
Dr. Lacey, so I have pretty much my last question. I want to ask you, Dr. Lacey, outside of your mentorship, your guidance, your program, what type of tools can our audience really tap into? Maybe it's an app. Maybe it's some books you recommend. What type of tools and resources can our audience get Mental Family really tap into so they can start making the daily necessary changes that can change their life?
Sure. So, I mean, there's tons and tons of great books out there. There's tons of great podcasts. If you just Google like money podcast or just go on Apple Podcasts and search money, you can find all kinds of great stuff. I've actually got a resource that I'm happy to give your listeners if you like. I created a reading list for just this purpose. For it's got books on investing, books on personal finance, that I've collected over the years that I think have been highly impactful for me and meaningful in my own life, and certainly have been valuable for people that I've coached. And so people are welcome to have that if they want, and they can download that at thescopeofpractice.com/reading list. And it's a free resource. And so feel free to, use that. I tell you what, there's 35 books on the list that pertain to business and personal finance. You read those books, it's, like getting an MBA. Yeah. So if you read those books, you'll be so far ahead of the game. So it's thescopeofpractice.com/reading list, but also just Google, budgeting apps. There's lots and lots of budgeting apps. I would strongly recommend just, either doing free versions of stuff for a while, or just doing stuff on pen and notebook paper. You can get a long way. You can get a long way with pen and notebook paper. It's thescopeofpractice.com/reading list. And there's 35 books on there that I think are really, really worth reading. I've also got if you go to the free download section at the bottom of my website, I've got a bunch of stuff down there that people are welcome to download for free. There's a budgeting guide if people have never budgeted before. You have
like worksheets?
Free worksheets for you. Just go to the scopeofpractice.com and scroll to the bottom, and you'll find the free downloads. And there's one for budgeting. There's one for setting long-term financial goals. There's a great one that I just wrote that I think would be really valuable for your audience, especially with this topic of financial infidelity. It's called 5 Financial Conversations All Couples Should Have.
Oh, I love that. What's on there?
So, you have to download. So you have to download to get them all, but again, it's free. But things like, where are you going to do private school versus public school for your kids? That's a huge decision. That's a 6-figure decision probably over the course of your life.
Oh yeah.
Where are you going to buy a house? What do you want your retirement to look like? These are all really important conversations that you need to have. And sometimes you just have to be deliberate about saying, okay, I'm going to have the conversation with my spouse now.
Yes. And what actually helps too with that is if you have a financial consultant guiding you through those decisions, if you have the resources to do that. And if you don't, you can also start for many of our listeners who have a job, see if you have what's called an employee assistance program, EAP, because EAP, you have legal and financial consultation benefit under that program. And the consult is free, Okay. And then if you choose to retain those services under the EAP program, you will get up to 20, usually up to 25% discount on the services. So, you know, you might already have this resource and you just didn't know about it. They can also give you advice on budgeting, debt consolidation, and so forth. So
yeah, just make sure that if you use that, and I'm fully support those kinds of things, just make sure that you ask them the question, who do they work for? Because if they work for the company, they're probably
yes,
looking out for your best interest. If they work for Wells Fargo or Bank of America or Capital One and they're being hired by your company, they work for the bank. And their
right.
interests are going to be into getting you into their loan products. And so you got to be very wary of where the advice is coming from, but 100% find someone that
Yeah.
can help you. Absolutely.
Absolutely. So, Dr. Lacey, any special advice for women, especially women who are, you know, women in the last, say, 20 years, we've become, thank God, a lot more financially knowledgeable and independent. Any patterns that you see, or any advice, and any advice for women as far
Yeah.
as financial
So,
health?
I pretty much give the same advice to men and women. But the advice that I tend to give for folks is that, you know, both partners in a marriage have equal say when it comes to stuff. Okay. So everybody gets a vote. Everybody's opinion matters. Everybody gets to participate, and everybody should be required to participate. So there's two ways that people have made mistakes on this. One is for someone to tell their spouse, look, money's not really my thing. You just deal with everything and I trust you. That is a recipe for disaster, because maybe they're not very good with money, or maybe
Mm-hmm.
maybe they're going to make some mistakes, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So you need to
Mm-hmm.
have a say. The second is to say, well, I'm just going to do everything. No, everybody needs to have an opinion, and make sure this, and I feel very strongly about this, I will tell you, is that when you get married, you combine everything, combine your finances. Everything's a joint checking account. Everything's joint. Okay. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about you guys, but, you know, when my wife and I got married, our, you know, pastor said, and now you are one, not now you are a joint business venture. Right. So,
Right.
you know, so
So
when,
there's a lot of people who might not agree with that, but I am in the same family as you. That
here's
is,
the thing,
these
and
are
those,
personal values, though.
but those people who disagree, they're certainly entitled to their opinions, but
Mm-hmm.
those are the families that end up coming to me for coaching, is folks that, you know,
Interesting.
they have had one person in the relationship that has managed the money for a long time, and either they get into financial infidelity situations, or they just kind of get in over their head, or one
Great
spouse feels
point.
resentful. It is a problem. So I'll give you an example. So my wife hasn't worked for several years now. Okay. I am the sole breadwinner of
Mm-hmm.
our family at the moment. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a family choice. That was a personal choice on her part. No one bullied her into it. It was just what she wanted to do, was stay home and take care of our kids. So for the last several years, 100% of the money that has been brought into the family has been from me. And I don't own anything. Okay. We own everything. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
There is no more I and me in a relationship
Yes.
anymore. It has to be we. That's
We.
the only
Yeah.
way it can work. So
Mm-hmm.
if everything's siloed and it's like, well, I'll use my money to pay the electric bill, you use your money to pay the water bill, and then we'll split the rent. That's a recipe. First of all, it's logistically a nightmare. So it's just a pain in the neck. But secondly, it's just a recipe for financial disaster, for, you know, familial disaster. I mean,
Right.
you can't have good communication when everybody is kind of doing their own thing. Everybody
Yeah.
has to be working for the good of the family, or you end up growing apart and not together.
Absolutely. And, you know, as a therapist, I have to be really careful when I tread those waters with couples and not impose my personal values. But I can honestly vouch for what Dr. Lacey is saying, that the couples I see have the most success and really loving, satisfying relationships are the couples whose financial lives are, you know, mingled or commingled in that way. And, you know, there is something to it, because when you think about it, if you're a team, right, if you're a basketball team and you want to win the championship, you can't be thinking about what's best for you and you only. You got to think about what's best for the team. You got to be able to, right, pass the ball when you need to, or make
Well,
that shot.
and here's the thing. We don't do that with any other aspects of our lives. We don't do it with parenting. It's not like, okay, you're going to raise this kid and I'll go raise this kid, and we'll just kind of compare notes periodically.
That's
Or,
so
you know, it's like,
true.
you clean this half of the house, I'll clean this half of the house, and we'll call it good. Or like, I'll put gas in the car and you change the tires periodically. We don't do that in any other part of our relationship.
Yeah.
So why would we do it with money?
Well, yeah. Well, that's another topic because my perspective on that is largely psychological, and it's a lot of fear based, you know, decision making that comes into it. But that again, that's another subject. So thank you for that. My final question here, our final question, because we're wrapping up here, is what types of situations do you think, or factors do you think protect couples from financial infidelity?
I think the number one has got to be communication. I mean, open and honest communication about everything. So, I mean, my wife and I do not keep secrets from each other. I mean, and again, this is, you know, maybe personal values, but I tell you what, secrecy just breeds problems. Okay.
Yep.
The root of all betrayal is some kind of a secret.
Mm-hmm.
That's just factual.
Mm-hmm.
Not saying that all secrets are bad, but all betrayal comes from hiding things. And so if you're open and honest about everything, and you have good conversations, and no subject is off limits, and you agree that, you know, you'll talk openly and not shame each other and not guilt each other, and you know, when there's something, and come up with, you know, so my wife and I used to come up with, you know, catchphrases or with stuff where we came up with these phrases that we could say, and then it would put our conversation into a frame of mind. We'd say, I feel unsettled. And that's me saying, I feel like something's a little off and I want to talk about it. And then immediately it takes all the tension out of the room. It's like, oh, okay, we've gotten off track somewhere. We want to talk about it. And there's no anger, there's no fear, there's no reprisal. It's just, I feel a little bit unsettled right now. So it's, or you say, hey, listen, I kind of want to have an awkward conversation,
Yeah.
find some way to just agree that you're going to be able to have open and honest communication. And that is the recipe for eliminating 90+% of conflict
And financial infidelity. Thank you
100%.
so much. Thank you. T, any final thoughts or questions? I can see you're in deep thought over there.
Yes,
I know that look when he's processing a lot.
Yes, I got to do my homework today. Oh man, yes, Dr. Lacey, I enjoyed every second of this. So much value today that I was able to take away and really instill in my life and, impact our community with this.
Yes.
I'm going to be sending a lot of people to your website as well. And I'm excited about getting some of the value and just furthermore learning how we can be better disciplined with our finances and really taking things to the next level. What I heard most about what you said today was budget. I got that down. So I'm ready to start that and ready to kind of shake the world up, creating that new budget and really getting everything in order.
Mm-hmm. Great. And, for all our listeners, I think you guys need to listen to this 2 or 3 times at least to really get the value. There's so many amazing nuggets that we covered here today. And, I hope one of the big takeaways is I hope we emphasized enough the power of financial literacy and the financial education. We cannot stress that enough. That is really the single most important factor in not just creating wealth, but breaking the cycle of poverty and financial insecurity in our lives. So, Dr. Lacey, I'll give you the final chance to share any thoughts and comments.
Well, I'll just say that, I always like to leave on a note of encouragement that no matter where your situation is right now, however deep a hole you've dug into, I guarantee you that I've worked with people that are in deeper holes that have been, having problems with money for longer or who have struggled with the same kinds of things you're struggling with. And it doesn't have to be the end of your life. It can be the beginning of a new chapter. So wherever you are right now, it's time to just start doing something different. So if you don't like the situation that you're in, or if there's something that, has happened, it's time to address it head on. And ultimately it's going to take an act of will on your part. It's going to take an act of just deciding that you want something different. And I know you can do it. And I if you keep listening to folks like Cecile and T and, just learning more stuff and finding out, all these new information, you'll get there.
Thank you so much. And you know, the good news is, because we're always about the good news as well, is that it's possible. These things are possible. There are a ton of resources and tools. It is really ultimately up to you, but there is no good reason to stay in this hole if you find yourself in it. So with that said, thank you so much, Dr. Lacey. We really appreciate having you here. Thank you for gracing our audience with your expertise. And like we always say, be well, be gentle, get
And get
mental,
mental, because
because
we
we
all
all
have
have issues.
issues.
Bye
Thank
for
you
now,
so
you
much,
guys.
Dr. Lacey.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.